A virgin billionaire CEO looks at a poor girl on a rain-soaked street and whispers, "I'd give up my fortune for a night with you." But it isn't what it sounds like. He doesn't want her body. He wants to feel human again. When fate brings them back together, their worlds collide. A man with everything and a woman holding on to faith with nothing but her hope and her mother's prayers. For a moment it feels like heaven opened its doors, until she discovers the truth. He's the reason her life is falling apart. Now he's willing to lose everything to make it right. She's fighting to believe love can survive betrayal, and the world is watching to see if compassion can still win in a world built on greed. Can a man who's never been touched by love truly give everything to be worthy of it? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The crystal chandeliers cast their golden glow across the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where New York's wealthiest gathered for yet another charity gala. Kevin Langford stood alone near a marble column, his 6'2" frame clothed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. At 38 years old, his dark hair showed touches of distinguished silver at the temples, but his face remained handsome and unlined. He lifted a champagne flute to his lips, not really tasting the expensive bubbles. "Mr. Langford," a photographer called out. "Just one more shot for the society page?" Kevin turned, offering the practiced smile he'd perfected over years of such events, his public face confident, controlled, successful. Inside, emptiness echoed through the vast chambers of his heart. A cluster of socialites in designer gowns drifted closer, their jewelry catching the light. "Kevin, darling," purred Amanda Winchester, her red lips curved in a predatory smile. "You simply must join us for dinner next week. I know the most fascinating woman I'd love to introduce you to." "Thank you, but I'm afraid I'm quite busy," Kevin replied smoothly, the words falling from his lips with practiced ease. He'd given this gentle rejection hundreds of times before. Amanda's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched. "Always so elusive. One might think you're hiding something." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. "Or perhaps preserving something." Titters of laughter rippled through her circle of friends. Kevin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I hear he's never been seen with anyone," one woman stage whispered. "Not even a casual date. At his age? How peculiar," another added with faux concern. "Maybe he's just waiting for the right billion-dollar merger," Amanda said with a sharp laugh that cut like glass. Kevin maintained his composed expression, but something inside him cracked. The careful walls he'd built around his private life felt suddenly exposed, his personal choices laid bare for mockery on the museum's polished floors. "If you'll excuse me," he said quietly, setting down his champagne. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." He made his way through the crowd, nodding at acquaintances, but never stopping. Phones flashed as he passed, capturing the eligible billionaire's exit for tomorrow's gossip columns. His footsteps echoed in the marble foyer as he collected his coat. "Sir." His driver jumped to attention outside, opening an umbrella against the steady autumn rain. "Home, James?" Kevin said, sliding into the back of the black limousine. The leather seats felt cold against his back. Through the tinted windows, Manhattan's lights blurred in the rain, a watercolor of wealth and loneliness. He loosened his bow tie, letting out a long breath. At 38 years old, he'd built an empire in tech innovation. His net worth was measured in billions. And yet here he sat, alone again, fleeing from another social gathering where he felt like an alien specimen under glass. The truth was both simpler and more complicated than the socialites imagined. His virginity wasn't some precious treasure he was hoarding. Nor was it born of prudishness or dysfunction. It was the natural result of a life spent building walls instead of bridges. After his mother's death when he was young, he'd watched his father pour himself into empire building, using wealth to fill the void of loss. Kevin had followed the same path, excelling at business but failing at basic human connection. The limousine glided through the wet streets, windshield wipers keeping steady time. Lost in thought, Kevin barely registered their progress until the car suddenly lurched to a stop, tires squealing slightly on the wet asphalt. A woman had appeared in the crosswalk, illuminated by the headlights. Time seemed to slow as Kevin watched her grocery bag split, contents spilling across the street. A gallon of milk burst open, white liquid mixing with rain puddles. Without thinking, Kevin grabbed his umbrella and opened the door. "Sir!" his driver called out in protest, but Kevin was already stepping into the rain. The woman knelt on the wet pavement, trying to salvage what she could of her groceries. Her dark hair hung in wet strings around her face, and her thin jacket offered little protection from the weather. Yet something in her movements spoke of dignity rather than defeat. "Please," Kevin said, holding his umbrella over her. "Let me help." She looked up, and Kevin found himself caught in the steady gaze of deep brown eyes. Her face was lovely but careworn, suggesting someone who had faced life's hardships head-on. "I'm fine," she said firmly, continuing to gather her scattered purchases. "I insist," Kevin said, already reaching for his wallet. "Let me at least replace your groceries. I don't take charity from men who have everything." Her voice was sharp, but not bitter, simply stating a fact. Kevin stepped back slightly, struck by her words. In her simple statement, she had seen through his expensive suit and careful manners to something he usually kept hidden: his overwhelming privilege, his disconnection from ordinary struggles. She stood, clutching her salvaged groceries close. Rain dripped from her coat, but her chin remained high, her posture unbowed. Without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the rainy night. Kevin stood there, holding his useless umbrella, long after she had gone. The rain soaked through his expensive wool coat, but he barely noticed. For the first time in years, something had cracked through his careful armor, not the mocking laughter of socialites, but the quiet dignity of a stranger in the rain. "Sir," his driver called anxiously. "You'll catch cold?" Kevin turned slowly back to the car, his movements automatic. But as he settled into the leather seat, he knew something had shifted. The woman's words echoed in his mind. Men who have everything. She had seen right through him, to the hollow center of his wealthy existence. As the limousine continued its journey through the wet streets, Kevin found himself thinking not of the gala's humiliations, but of brown eyes that had met his without artifice or agenda. He had spent years building walls to protect himself from shallow connections, never realizing those same walls might be keeping out something real. The rain continued to fall outside, washing the streets clean, and somewhere in Kevin Langford's carefully ordered world, a crack had appeared, small but significant, letting in the first hint of change. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Kevin's corner office, but he barely noticed its warmth. His mind kept drifting back to the woman from last night, her proud stance in the rain, the quiet dignity in her refusal of his help. He'd spent countless mornings in this office making billion-dollar decisions, yet today he couldn't focus on a single spreadsheet. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Sir, the board is waiting in the main conference room." Kevin straightened his tie and gathered his thoughts. He had responsibilities, expectations to meet. One chance encounter shouldn't derail his entire day. Yet, as he walked down the corridor toward the conference room, his footsteps echoing on marble floors, he felt strangely disconnected from it all. The board members rose as he entered, 12 men and women in expensive suits, each representing decades of corporate power. They watched him with careful smiles as he took his seat at the head of the gleaming mahogany table. "Good morning," he said automatically. "Let's begin." Marcus Chen, head of urban development, stepped forward with a sleek presentation remote. "We're excited to share our plans for the Lower East Side project, Mr. Langford." The projector hummed to life, displaying architectural renderings of gleaming glass towers. Kevin nodded along mechanically as Marcus detailed profit projections and market analyses. His mind kept wandering to rain-soaked streets and spilled milk. "The only obstacle," Marcus was saying, "is the current occupancy. Several small businesses, mostly family-owned establishments. Nothing significant. We'll need to clear the entire block." Photos flashed across the screen. Worn but clean storefronts, a florist, a bookstore, several small restaurants, places where real people made their livings, served their communities. "The compensation packages are fair," another board member added quickly. "More than fair, really, considering the age of these buildings." Kevin realized they were waiting for his response. In the past, he would have already been asking detailed questions about timeline and projected returns. Instead, he heard himself say, "Approved. Move forward with the plans." He signed the necessary documents without really seeing them, his signature flowing across paper that would change dozens of lives. The board members exchanged pleased looks, but Kevin felt a heaviness in his chest that no amount of profit could lift. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls, but his thoughts kept returning to the woman from the crosswalk. There had been something real in her presence, something that stood in stark contrast to the artificial world he inhabited. That evening, instead of heading home, Kevin found himself searching online for diners in the area where she'd disappeared. After several attempts, he found it. Maribel's Diner, a modest establishment with decent reviews praising its home-style cooking and friendly service. The next day, Kevin studied his reflection in his bedroom mirror. His usual tailored suits wouldn't do. He found an old jacket from his college days in the back of his closet, slightly worn at the elbows, but still presentable. A baseball cap completed the transformation. In these clothes, he looked almost ordinary. Maribel's Diner sat on a corner, its windows gleaming warm and inviting in the early evening light. A bell chimed softly as Kevin pushed open the door. The scent of coffee and fresh baked bread wrapped around him like a comfortable blanket. And there she was. Victoria moved between tables with graceful efficiency, coffee pot in hand, greeting customers by name. Despite obvious fatigue in her movements, her smile remained genuine, her attention focused on each person she served. She looked different in her blue waitress uniform, but no less dignified than she had in the rain. Kevin slid into a booth, heart pounding. When Victoria approached his table, she showed no sign of recognizing him from their encounter in the rain. "Welcome to Maribel's," she said warmly. "Coffee to start?" "Yes, please," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. She poured with practiced ease, steam rising between them. "Take your time with the menu. Soup's good today. Vegetable beef, made fresh this morning." "I'll have that," he said quickly. "And coffee's fine for now. Coming right up." She turned away, then paused. "I'm Victoria, by the way, if you need anything else." Kevin watched her move through the diner, stopping to chat with an elderly man about his grandchildren, helping a young mother settle her kids with crayons and paper placemats. Each interaction was genuine, unhurried despite her busy schedule. When she returned with his soup, she tilted her head slightly. "I don't think I caught your name." "Kevin?" he said, then added quickly. "Lake. Kevin Lake." Her smile turned playful. "You don't look like you're from around here, Kevin Lake." He stirred his soup, searching for a response that wouldn't be a complete lie. "I'm not, really, just exploring different neighborhoods." Well, you picked a good spot to explore. We may not be fancy, but nobody leaves hungry. She refilled his coffee without being asked. How's the soup? It's perfect, he said honestly. The simple, hearty flavor reminded him of meals from his childhood, before his mother's death, before everything became about status and appearance. Their conversation flowed easily whenever she passed his table. Nothing deep or profound, just comfortable exchanges about the weather, the neighborhood, the day's specials. For the first time in years, Kevin felt like himself, not the CEO of Langford Industries or the billionaire philanthropist, just a man having soup in a diner. When he finally stood to leave, Victoria was at the register. She slipped something into his takeout bag with a conspiratorial wink. You look like you need it, she said, handing him the bag. Outside, Kevin discovered a freshly baked roll wrapped in a napkin. The simple gesture of kindness made his throat tight. He walked into the night, the warm bread in his bag feeling like both a gift and an accusation. The comfort he'd found in those brief, ordinary interactions was already being overshadowed by the knowledge of what his signature that morning would mean for places like Maribel's. He felt the weight of his two worlds, the corporate titan who could casually approve the destruction of small businesses, and the man who had just experienced the simple grace of a genuine smile and an extra roll slipped into his bag. Kevin's Italian leather shoes made no sound on the polished marble floors of his penthouse as he walked towards the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled before him like a jeweled tapestry, countless lights twinkling in the darkness. From this height, everything looked small, distant, and perfect, much like his own carefully managed life. But tonight, the view that usually brought him peace only emphasized his loneliness. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. Impeccable suit, perfectly styled hair, features that magazines called handsome. Yet all he could see was the mask he wore, the careful facade that kept everyone at arm's length. Victoria's smile kept appearing in his mind, warm and genuine. He remembered how her eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed, the gentle way she touched an elderly customer's shoulder, the quiet dignity with which she carried herself despite her obvious exhaustion. Unlike the polished smiles he encountered at galas and board meetings, hers held no agenda, no hidden motives. In the diner, she had treated him like any other person, not as Kevin Langford, the billionaire CEO, but as Kevin Lake, a simple customer who needed soup and coffee. The memory of that ordinary interaction felt more precious than any business deal he'd ever closed. I'd give up my fortune for a night with you, he whispered to the empty room, then stopped, startled by his own words. Heat crept up his neck as he realized how that might sound, but he knew he didn't mean it that way. What he yearned for wasn't physical intimacy. It was the peace she radiated, the simple human connection that all his wealth had never managed to buy. The following days passed in a blur of meetings and obligations, but Kevin found himself drawn back to Maribel's diner again and again. He created excuses, meetings in the area, lunch breaks, early dinners. Each time, he wore his Kevin Lake disguise, and each time, Victoria's genuine welcome made his heart lighter. He began finding small ways to help without drawing attention. When she wasn't looking, he'd leave generous tips tucked under napkins or sugar dispensers. One afternoon, he noticed a wobbly chair, and while the diner was nearly empty, casually tightened its loose screws with a small multi-tool he carried. "Did you fix that chair?" Victoria asked, catching him as he straightened up. "It just needed a little adjustment," he said, pocketing the tool quickly. She smiled that warm smile that made his chest ache. "You're full of surprises, aren't you, Mr. Lake?" One evening, as Kevin sat in his usual booth, he overheard a conversation that made him freeze with his coffee cup halfway to his lips. A middle-aged man in light blue medical scrubs was speaking to Victoria at the counter. "Mum's getting worse, Vicky," the man said softly. "The doctor says she needs the surgery soon, but the insurance—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Victoria's face showed a flash of worry before she controlled it. "We'll figure something out, Marcus. We always do." But Kevin could hear the strain in her voice, see the tension in her shoulders as she turned away to wipe down the counter. That night, in his home office, Kevin made a phone call to the director of his charitable foundation. "I need you to arrange something," he said, pacing beside his desk. "There's a woman named Victoria Moreno. Her mother needs surgery. I want you to cover all the costs, but it has to be completely anonymous. Make it look like a random act of kindness program or something similar." "Of course, Mr. Langford," the director replied. "We'll take care of it discreetly." After hanging up, Kevin walked to his bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of his nightstand. Beneath some papers lay a Bible, its leather cover slightly dusty from disuse. He couldn't remember the last time he'd opened it, probably not since his mother's funeral, when he'd been barely 20 years old. He sat on the edge of his bed, running his fingers over the embossed cover. His mother had given him this Bible on his 16th birthday, inscribing it with words about faith, love, and grace. Back then, he'd still believed in such things. Before his father's ruthless business practices had shown him a harder world, before wealth and success had become his only measure of worth. Opening the Bible randomly, Kevin found himself in the Book of Psalms. The familiar words brought back memories of Sunday mornings with his mother, her gentle voice reading these same verses. His throat tightened as he thought about Victoria. How she reminded him somehow of his mother's grace. "If this is from you," he prayed quietly, the words feeling strange and rusty in his mouth, "let me not ruin it." He paused, then added, "And please, help me be worthy of her kindness." The city continued to glitter outside his windows, but for the first time in years, Kevin felt something shift inside him. It wasn't dramatic, no lightning bolt or sudden revelation, just a quiet awareness that perhaps there was more to life than what he'd allowed himself to experience. The simple joy of fixing a wobbly chair, the warmth of a genuine smile, the possibility of helping someone without expecting anything in return. These small things felt more real than all his acquisitions and achievements. He closed the Bible but kept it on his nightstand instead of returning it to the drawer. Tomorrow he would return to the diner, order his usual soup, and watch Victoria move through her world with grace and dignity. And maybe, just maybe, he could learn from her how to be human again. A week passed like a dream. Kevin found himself checking his watch constantly at work, counting the hours until he could return to Marable's diner. That afternoon, he sat in his usual corner booth, pretending to read a newspaper while actually watching Victoria serve customers with her usual grace. Suddenly, the diner's bell chimed as Victoria burst through the door, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Her face was flushed from running, and she could barely contain herself as she called out to her co-workers, "Maria! Jenny! You won't believe what happened!" Her voice trembled with emotion. Someone paid for Mum's entire surgery, every single penny. The other waitresses dropped what they were doing and rushed to her. Maria, a motherly woman in her 50s, wrapped Victoria in a tight hug. Jenny, barely 20, jumped up and down, clapping her hands. "An anonymous donor," Victoria continued, wiping her eyes. "The hospital just called. They said it's all taken care of. Everything." The news spread quickly through the small diner. Regular customers put down their forks and coffee cups, breaking into spontaneous applause. Some called out, "God bless!" and "What a miracle!" In his corner booth, Kevin pulled his cap lower over his eyes, his throat tight with emotion. He watched Victoria move through the diner, accepting hugs and well wishes, her face radiant with gratitude and disbelief. This was what real wealth looked like, he thought. Not the cold numbers in his bank accounts, but the warm light of joy in someone's eyes. The afternoon shift seemed to fly by. Kevin nursed his coffee, watching Victoria float between tables. Her smile was brighter than ever, and several times he caught her wiping away fresh tears of happiness. As closing time approached, the diner slowly emptied. Kevin waited until Victoria finished her cleanup duties, then slipped outside to stand by the curb. The evening air was crisp, carrying the first hints of autumn. Street lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. When Victoria emerged from the diner, she didn't seem surprised to find him waiting. "Kevin?" she said softly, coming to stand beside him. Her eyes were still bright with wonder. "I have to tell you something amazing." He turned to face her, careful to keep his expression neutral despite the warmth spreading through his chest. "What happened?" "It's like a miracle," she began, her words tumbling out in excitement. "My mom, I told you about her needing surgery, right? Well, today we found out someone's paying for all of it. Every single bit. Can you believe it?" Kevin swallowed hard, fighting to keep his voice steady. "That's wonderful news." "I don't know who did it," Victoria continued, looking up at the darkening sky. "But it feels like God heard me, you know? All those nights I spent praying, wondering how we'd ever manage." "He probably did," Kevin said softly, the words catching slightly in his throat. Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment he feared she might see through his disguise. But she only smiled, that pure, genuine smile that made his heart ache. "Would you like to walk for a while?" she asked. "I know it's getting late, but I'm too happy to go home yet." They began walking toward the East River, their footsteps falling into an easy rhythm. The city's noise seemed to fade as they reached the riverside path. Water lapped gently against the embankment, and the lights of Brooklyn twinkled across the dark water. "Tell me more about your faith," Kevin said after a while. "How do you hold on to it in a city like this?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering. "It wasn't always easy. Growing up, we didn't have much. I never knew my father. He left before I was born. But Mom, she never let bitterness take root. She taught me that faith isn't just about church on Sundays or saying the right words. It's about believing in something bigger than yourself, even when everything seems dark." Kevin nodded, thinking of his own mother and her quiet faith. "I used to believe," he admitted. "A long time ago. I'm trying to find my way back, I guess." "What happened?" Victoria asked gently. He chose his words carefully, aware of his need to stay partially hidden. "Life got complicated. Success, money, power, they can make you forget what matters. Make you think you don't need anything else." They walked in companionable silence for a while, the river moving steadily beside them. Kevin felt an almost overwhelming urge to reach for her hand, to draw her close, but he kept his distance. This connection between them felt too precious, too pure to risk with physical desire. Their evening walks became a ritual over the next few days. After her shift, they would stroll along the river, sharing pieces of their lives. Victoria told him about growing up in a small apartment, about her mother teaching her to cook using whatever they had, about the community that formed around their tiny kitchen table. Kevin found himself opening up too, carefully editing his stories, but sharing real truth about his spiritual struggles, his loneliness, his desire to make his life mean something more than profit margins and stock prices. Each conversation felt like a gift, each shared laugh a treasure. They never touched, not even accidentally. But something deeper was growing between them, something that made Kevin's carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. Each night, watching her walk toward her apartment building, He felt the weight of his deception more heavily. But he also felt something else. Hope. Hope that maybe, through Victoria's eyes, he could learn to see the world and himself differently. The city continued its endless rhythm around them, but in these evening walks they found a pocket of peace. Two souls warming each other in a cold city, sharing the kind of connection that needed no physical expression to be profound. Victoria's fingers trembled as she reached for the bright red notice taped to Maribel's Diner's front door. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalk, and the paper's harsh color seemed to mock the cheerful window decorations she'd put up just last week. "No," she whispered, reading the words again. "This can't be happening." Notice of eviction property acquired by Langford Industries for City Heart Renewal Project. Vacate premises within 30 days. Her co-workers gathered around, their faces reflecting the same shock and disbelief. Maria, the cook who'd worked here for 20 years, started crying quietly. Old Joe, their regular customer, who always came for breakfast, stood on the sidewalk shaking his head. "They're tearing down the whole block," he said, pointing to similar notices on neighboring businesses. "Some fancy development project." Victoria's mind raced to all the families who depended on their jobs here, to the community that gathered daily around these worn tables. This wasn't just a diner. It was home to so many people. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and searched City Heart Renewal Project. News articles popped up immediately, featuring a familiar corporate logo. Her heart stopped when she saw the announcement of a public meeting scheduled for that afternoon. "I'm going," she declared, her voice stronger than she felt. "Someone has to speak up for us." The meeting was held in a sleek conference center downtown. Victoria felt out of place in her waitress uniform, but she hadn't had time to change. The room was packed with developers, city officials, and concerned citizens. She found a seat near the back, her stomach churning with anxiety. The moderator stepped up to the microphone. "Please welcome our keynote speaker, CEO of Langford Industries, Kevin Langford." Victoria's world tilted sideways. The man who walked onto the stage wasn't wearing the worn jacket and cap she knew. Instead, he wore an impeccable suit that probably cost more than she made in a year. But the face, the way he moved, it was unmistakably her Kevin. Kevin Lake. The man she'd shared her hopes and fears with, the man she'd begun to trust with her heart. He was Kevin Langford, the billionaire CEO, the man destroying her community. The room spun as memories crashed through her mind. Every conversation, every shared laugh, every moment of connection. All built on lies. Kevin began his presentation, his voice carrying the polished authority she'd never heard in their evening walks. "The City Heart Renewal Project represents a $30 million investment in our city's future." Something snapped inside Victoria. Before she fully realized what she was doing, she was on her feet, pushing past startled attendees toward the stage. "You liar!" The words tore from her throat, raw with betrayal. Heads whipped around to stare at her, but she couldn't stop. All those nights, all those conversations, was any of it real? Kevin froze mid-sentence, his professional mask cracking as he recognized her. The color drained from his face. "You said you'd give up your fortune for one night," Victoria continued, tears streaming down her face. "I guess that was a lie too." Security guards moved toward her, but she barely noticed them. Her eyes were locked on Kevin's, watching the pain and shame spread across his features. "Victoria, please," he started to say, stepping toward her. "Let me explain." But the guards had reached her. They grabbed her arms, steering her toward the exit as cameras flashed and phones recorded. She didn't resist. She felt too hollow inside to fight. "You destroyed everything," she called out one last time before the doors closed behind her. everything. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright, too harsh. Victoria collapsed onto a nearby bench, her body shaking with sobs. How could she have been so naive? How could she not have seen through his disguise? Meanwhile, in his penthouse that evening, Kevin sat alone in the darkness, his laptop screen the only source of light. The viral video of Victoria's confrontation played on repeat. Her pain, her anger, her tears broadcast for the world to see. His own tears fell freely as he watched, each drop carrying the weight of his shame. The comments below the video were merciless. "Billionaire CEO exposed! Another rich guy playing with people's lives. Guess money can't buy everything." But Kevin barely saw them. All he could see was Victoria's face, the trust in her eyes shattered because of him. All he could hear were her words echoing in his head. "You destroyed everything." He closed his eyes, remembering their walks by the river, their conversations about faith and meaning. He'd felt so alive during those moments, so real. Now he understood the cruel irony. While he was playing at being poor, his wealth was actively destroying the community that had shown him what true richness looked like. The realization hit him with crushing force. His money didn't just fail to save, it destroyed. It destroyed trust, dignity, community. It had destroyed the one genuine connection he'd found in years. Kevin reached for his phone, then stopped. What could he possibly say to make this right? How could he explain that the man she'd known, the one who listened, who cared, who was learning to believe again, was more real than the CEO in the suit? The city lights sparkled beyond his windows, but they no longer held any beauty for him. They just reminded him of all the small businesses, all the communities his company had displaced in the name of progress. How many other Victorias had he hurt without even knowing? He sat there in the darkness, letting the tears fall, finally facing the true cost of his wealth. The video played on, a digital testament to his failure to be the man Victoria had helped him want to become. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Langford Industries' executive boardroom, but the atmosphere inside was anything but bright. Kevin stood at the head of the long mahogany table, his hands pressed flat against its polished surface, facing the stern faces of his board members. "I'm suspending the City Heart Renewal Project indefinitely," he announced, his voice firm despite the tension knotting his stomach. "Effective immediately." The reaction was instant and explosive. Board members shot to their feet, their voices overlapping in outrage. "Have you lost your mind?" Theodore Harrison, the eldest board member, slammed his fist on the table. "We've invested $37 million in this project." Sarah Chen, the head of development, leaned forward. "The shareholders will revolt, Kevin. We've promised them specific returns." "This is about that waitress, isn't it?" James Morrison sneered, tossing a tablet onto the table. On its screen was a viral video of Victoria's confrontation, already at 2 million views. The Virgin CEO's having a crisis of conscience? Kevin's jaw tightened at their mockery, but he held his ground. "I've seen firsthand the damage our developments are doing to local communities. We're destroying people's livelihoods, their homes. We're creating progress." Theodore cut in. "Those neighborhoods need updating. We're improving property values. For who?" Kevin's voice rose. "The people we're forcing out? The families losing their businesses? Oh, spare us the bleeding heart routine." James scoffed. "You've never cared about this before. What changed? Did this waitress get under your skin?" Before Kevin could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from PR. The story had already leaked to the press. Headlines were spreading like wildfire. Langford CEO halts $1 million project over waitress scandal. Virgin billionaire's romance costs investors millions. Love or lunacy. Kevin Langford's costly crush. Within hours, the media circus was in full swing. Paparazzi swarmed the Langford Industries building, their cameras flashing like strobe lights. News vans clogged the streets. Reporters shouted questions as Kevin tried to leave the building. "Mr. Langford, is it true you fell in love with a waitress?" "Kevin, how long have you been living a double life? Are you having a mental breakdown, Mr. Langford?" But worse than the media frenzy outside his office was what was happening in Victoria's neighborhood. Photographers camped outside Marrable's diner, harassing customers and staff. They followed Victoria on her walks to work, shouting questions about her relationship with Kevin. The pressure became too much. Victoria's new boss at the catering company that had temporarily hired the diner's staff called her into the office one rainy afternoon. "I'm sorry, Victoria," he said, not meeting her eyes. "We can't have all this attention. It's bad for business. We're going to have to let you go." With no income and reporters making their lives impossible, Victoria and her mother could no longer afford their small apartment. The church where Victoria had attended since childhood offered them shelter in their basement living quarters, normally reserved for traveling missionaries. Kevin learned of their situation through his private investigator. That night, he sat in his penthouse office, drafting and redrafting a letter until the words felt right. "Dear Victoria, I know no apology can undo the harm I've caused. The man you knew as Kevin Lake, the one who listened to your stories, who shared your walks, who was learning to believe again through your example. He was real. More real than the CEO I've been pretending to be all these years. I didn't plan to deceive you. I just wanted for once to be seen as a person, not a fortune. But that doesn't excuse the pain I've caused you and your community. I'm trying to make things right, starting with stopping the demolition. I know you may never forgive me, and I understand. But please know that meeting you has changed everything. You showed me what true wealth looks like. It's not in bank accounts or buildings, but in the kind of faith and dignity you show every day. I'm sorry for everything." He sent the letter through Pastor Michael at Victoria's church, but days later it came back unopened. The rejection hit him hard, but he understood. Trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired with mere words. Unable to sleep, Kevin began taking long walks through the neighborhoods his company had targeted for development. He saw things he'd never noticed from his executive suite: elderly couples sitting on worn but well-kept stoops, children playing basketball with makeshift hoops, neighbors sharing meals on fire escapes. He saw dignity in the struggle, community in the hardship. One evening, as winter's first snow began to fall, Kevin filled his car with groceries, not just basics, but good quality food, including the types of things he'd seen Victoria buy that first night. He added an envelope containing $5,000 in cash. Under cover of darkness, he drove to the church and quietly left the supplies at the side door, where he knew Victoria and her mother were staying. As he walked away, snowflakes melting on his face, mingling with tears, Kevin looked up at the church's cross silhouetted against the night sky. The words came from deep within him, a vow that felt more binding than any business contract he'd ever signed. "I'll make this right," he whispered into the snowy night, "even if I lose everything." The city continued to buzz with scandal and speculation, but Kevin barely noticed anymore. He had found something worth more than his reputation, more than his fortune. He had found his conscience. And though it had cost him dearly, he knew he couldn't go back to being the man he was before. 3 weeks after Kevin's late-night vow in the snow, he called a press conference outside Marrable's diner. The February morning was bitter cold, but a crowd had gathered, reporters, local residents, and curious onlookers. Kevin stood at a makeshift podium, no longer wearing his trademark designer suits. Instead, he wore a simple wool coat and work boots. "For too long," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "I've been part of a system that valued profit over people. Today that changes." He paused, making eye contact with the familiar faces from the neighborhood. I'm announcing the City Heart Cooperative Cafe project. We're not just rebuilding this diner, we're transforming it into something that belongs to all of us. The plan was revolutionary in its simplicity. The new cafe would be owned cooperatively by its workers and the community. Priority hiring would go to local residents and homeless veterans. Profits would be reinvested in neighborhood programs. The building would include a training center and meeting spaces for community events. "This isn't charity," Kevin emphasized, his breath visible in the cold air. "This is justice. This is community. This is what real development should look like." The media reaction was swift and brutal. CNBC ran a segment titled "Billionaire's Breakdown: Langford's Latest Folly." The Wall Street Journal published an editorial calling it "Socialism Masquerading as Corporate Responsibility." Twitter exploded with memes mocking the Virgin CEO's love-struck philanthropy. Within days, major investors began pulling out of Langford Industries. The company's stock price dropped 23% in a single week. Board members called emergency meetings, threatening to force Kevin out if he didn't reverse course. But while Wall Street raged, something remarkable was happening in the neighborhood. Local business owners started showing up at planning meetings, offering expertise and support. The owner of a hardware store donated supplies. A retired architect volunteered to help with designs. The local carpenters' union offered free labor. At the heart of this grassroots movement was Father Miguel, the gentle but determined pastor of St. Anthony's Church. He'd known Victoria since she was a child and had been sheltering her and her mother since the eviction notice. One morning, after Mass, he found Victoria helping in the church kitchen. "He's really trying, you know," Father Miguel said softly, watching her chop vegetables for the shelter's lunch. Victoria's knife paused mid-cut. "Who?" "Kevin Langford. He's been here every Saturday, helping serve meals. Never says much, just works." "I didn't know that," Victoria said, resuming her chopping with more force than necessary. Father Miguel smiled gently. "This weekend, he's organizing a community cleanup day at the diner site. Maybe you should come see for yourself." "I can't," Victoria said quickly. "I have things to do." "Of course." Father Miguel nodded. "But, you know, Victoria, sometimes the hardest person to forgive is the one who's truly sorry." She didn't respond, but Father Miguel noticed she was blinking back tears. That Saturday dawned clear and cold. Victoria found herself walking towards the diner, telling herself she was just curious about the changes in the neighborhood. From half a block away, she could see the crowd gathered around the old building. People were hauling debris, sweeping and setting up workstations. Then she saw him. Kevin was in the thick of it, wearing work gloves and a worn jacket, his face streaked with dirt. He was helping an elderly veteran move a heavy piece of broken furniture, listening intently as the man spoke. Gone was any trace of the polished CEO or even the quiet Kevin Lake she'd known. This was someone new, or perhaps someone who had been there all along, waiting to emerge. Without conscious decision, Victoria found herself picking up a broom. She worked her way slowly around the periphery, keeping her distance but watching. She saw how Kevin treated everyone with the same respect, whether they were business owners or homeless, how he listened more than he spoke, how his eyes held a new kind of light, not the artificial gleam of success, but something warmer, more human. Hours passed. The sun was setting when Victoria finally stopped sweeping. Her arms ached, but something else ached more, the hard shell of anger she'd been carrying. She watched as Kevin helped pack up tools, thanking each volunteer personally. Later that night, in the quiet of the church shelter, Victoria knelt beside her bed. The words came slowly, painfully honest. "Lord, help me forgive what he didn't know. Help me understand that sometimes people have to lose their way to find it. And maybe, help me find my way too." Through the small window, she could see the old diner's outline against the night sky. It looked different now, not like a symbol of loss, but like a promise of something new, not just for the neighborhood, but for everyone involved. Across town, in his increasingly empty penthouse, Kevin was also praying. He'd sold most of his artwork and luxury items to fund the project, and the space echoed with possibility. He didn't ask for success or vindication. Instead, he prayed for the strength to keep going, to rebuild not just a building, but trust. To become worthy of the grace he'd been shown, even if it meant losing everything he'd once thought important. The media circus continued, but it felt increasingly distant from the real story unfolding in that small corner of the city. Day by day, brick by brick, something was being built that went far beyond business plans and bottom lines. It was a restoration of faith, in community, in change, and in the power of love to transform not just hearts, but whole neighborhoods. The City Heart Cooperative Cafe project moved forward, powered not by corporate millions, but by something far more valuable, the collective will of people who believed in second chances. And in the middle of it all, two people were learning that sometimes the longest journey isn't measured in miles, but in the distance between pride and forgiveness, between what was lost and what might still be found. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of the old diner as Victoria stood in its empty shell, arms crossed, considering the proposal before her. The space held so many memories, both sweet and bitter. "You want me to manage the cafe?" she asked, eyeing Kevin skeptically. He nodded, keeping a respectful distance. "There's no one better qualified. You know this community, you understand what people need, and you—" "I have conditions," Victoria interrupted, turning to face him fully. "Name them. If I do this, you work here too, not as the boss, as a regular employee. Washing dishes, cleaning floors, whatever needs doing." Her chin lifted slightly. "Just like everyone else." Kevin's response came without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." Victoria blinked, surprised by his quick agreement. "You understand what that means? No special treatment, no hiding in an office?" A small smile touched his lips. "I've spent enough time hiding. When do we start?" The transformation began slowly. Local contractors, many of whom remembered Victoria from her waitressing days, arrived to help with renovations. Kevin showed up every morning in work clothes, ready to tackle whatever task Victoria assigned. The first week, she put him on dish duty during the temporary soup kitchen they'd set up in the back. His pressed clothes quickly became soaked, and his expensive watch found a permanent home in his pocket. But he never complained. "You're holding that brush like it might bite you," Victoria commented, demonstrating the proper scrubbing technique. Their hands brushed briefly, and both pretended not to notice the spark of electricity that passed between them. As days turned into weeks, the cafe took shape. Kevin discovered he had a talent for painting walls, but absolutely none for baking. One memorable morning, smoke billowed from the newly installed ovens as he attempted his first batch of muffins. "I think they're supposed to be golden brown, not charcoal black," Victoria said, trying to hide her amusement as Kevin fanned the smoke with a dish towel. He looked at the burned offerings with such genuine dismay that Victoria couldn't help laughing. After a moment, Kevin joined in, and the sound of their shared laughter echoed through the cafe like a promise of better days. The neighborhood began to warm to him. Mrs. Rodriguez from the flower shop started bringing him homemade tamales. Old Mr. Chen from the hardware store would stop by to offer advice about the renovation, switching between English and Mandarin while Kevin listened intently, taking notes. But it was the late nights that changed everything. After the workers left and the dust settled, Kevin and Victoria would sit at the makeshift counter, sharing instant coffee from paper cups. In those quiet hours, walls began to crumble. "I used to think faith was about having all the answers," Kevin admitted one night, staring into his coffee. Now I realize it's about trusting even when you don't. Victoria watched him thoughtfully. When did you stop believing? When my mother died. I was 15. My father's response was to throw himself into work, to build bigger walls around his heart. I followed his example. He paused, until I met someone who showed me a different way. Their eyes met in the dim light, and Victoria quickly looked away. Another evening, as snow fell softly outside, Victoria shared her own struggles. Sometimes I was so angry at God, watching Mum suffer, working 3 jobs, never quite enough money, but she never lost her faith. She taught me that being poor in wallet doesn't mean being poor in spirit. The cafe's progress became a symbol of something larger, a community coming together, barriers breaking down, hearts healing. Kevin learned to make decent coffee, though his muffins remained hazardous, and Victoria found herself looking forward to their evening talks. One snowy evening, as Christmas lights twinkled in nearby shop windows, Victoria's mother made her way to the cafe. She moved slowly with her walker, but her eyes were bright as she took in the transformation. "It's beautiful," she said, touching the newly painted walls. "Just beautiful." Kevin stepped forward to help her to a chair, but she waved him off with a smile. "I want to thank you, Mr. Langford, not just for my surgery, but for saving this place. It means everything to our community." Kevin glanced at Victoria, who was pretending to be busy with some papers, but clearly listening. "Mom," he said gently, "it's your daughter who saved me. I was lost in a world of numbers and power, forgetting what really matters. She reminded me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts, it's in how we treat each other." Victoria's mother reached out and patted his hand. "Then I'd say we've all been blessed by this miracle." As the cafe neared completion, something else was being built. Trust, understanding, and perhaps something deeper. The peace Kevin felt wasn't just about the project's success. It was about finding his place in a community, about rediscovering his faith through service, and about the way Victoria's smile could light up even the darkest winter evening. One night, as they sat surrounded by paint swatches and menu drafts, Kevin realized he hadn't thought about his old life in weeks. The penthouse felt like a distant memory compared to the warmth of this place, with its mismatched chairs and the constant smell of coffee. Here, among the very people he once would have displaced, he had found something his billions never bought. He had found home. The cafe's soft lights glowed against the falling snow outside, and in that moment everything felt possible. Not because of money or power, but because of grace, the kind that comes when you stop trying to control everything and simply let love lead the way. Victoria looked up from her papers, catching him lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts. Just grateful," he said simply. And for once, words felt completely unnecessary between them. The sound of carols drifted in from the street, and they worked on in comfortable silence, 2 people who had started as strangers, now bound by something far stronger than circumstance, the shared vision of what could be when faith and second chances came together. The morning of Maribel's Cafe, grand reopening, dawned crisp and bright, with winter sunlight sparkling off fresh snow. The restored brick building stood proudly at the corner, its windows gleaming, and a new hand-painted sign swinging gently in the breeze. Red and white striped awnings added a cheerful touch, while garlands of pine and twinkling lights decorated the entrance. By 9 o'clock, the sidewalk was already crowded with neighbors, their breath visible in the cold air as they chatted excitedly. Old customers from the original diner stood alongside new faces, all drawn together by the promise of something special. Children darted between adults' legs, their laughter adding to the festive atmosphere. Inside, Victoria moved through the cafe with purpose, adjusting flowers and straightening chairs. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the crisp white tablecloths. The space looked nothing like the old diner, yet somehow felt exactly right. Modern touches blended seamlessly with cozy charm. Exposed brick walls contrasted with warm wood accents, while vintage photos of the neighborhood lined the walls, telling stories of community across generations. Kevin stood in the kitchen, his tie slightly crooked and his usually perfect hair showing signs of nervous fidgeting. He'd traded his $1,000 suits for a simple white shirt and dark slacks, rolled up at the sleeves. The past months of physical work had changed him. His hands were calloused now, his stance more relaxed. "Everything ready in here?" Victoria asked, poking her head through the kitchen door. "I think so," Kevin replied, gesturing to the gleaming equipment and neatly arranged supplies. "Though I still can't guarantee my muffins won't be classified as dangerous weapons." Victoria laughed, the sound echoing off the stainless steel surfaces. "That's why we hired actual bakers, remember?" Their eyes met, and for a moment, the bustle of preparation faded away. So much had changed since that rainy night with the spilled groceries. They'd both lost things, his fortune, her security, but gained something far more precious. The moment was broken by Father Miguel's arrival, his booming voice carrying through the cafe. "Are we ready to bless this beautiful place?" Victoria's mother, Elena, followed slowly behind him, leaning on her walker but beaming with pride. She wore her best dress, and her silver hair was carefully styled. The surgery had given her new strength, though she still moved cautiously. At exactly 10 o'clock, Victoria opened the front doors. The crowd poured in, filling the space with warmth and excited chatter. Mr. Chen from the hardware store, Mrs. Rodriguez from the flower shop, the veterans who'd helped with construction, families from the church, even some of the construction workers who'd initially grumbled about the project had shown up, won over by Kevin's willingness to work alongside them. When it was time for speeches, Kevin stepped forward reluctantly. Public speaking had once been second nature to him, but this was different. This wasn't about impressing shareholders or manipulating markets. This was about truth. He cleared his throat, adjusting the microphone. "When I first came to this neighborhood, I thought I knew everything about building things. I had blueprints and budgets and big plans." He paused, looking around at the faces before him. "But you taught me that real development isn't about tearing down and replacing. It's about restoration. Of buildings, yes, but more importantly, of hearts and communities." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Kevin continued, his voice growing stronger. "This cafe isn't just my project. It belongs to all of you. Every person who painted a wall, planted flowers, or simply believed in second chances. You've built something far more valuable than any luxury development." Victoria watched from near the counter, her heart full. The man speaking wasn't the cold CEO she'd first met, but he also wasn't the pretend Kevin Lake. This was the real Kevin Langford, finally comfortable in his own skin. After Kevin's speech, Elena made her way to the front, insisting on standing without her walker. Her voice quivered with emotion as she addressed the crowd. "When times were hardest, I always told Victoria that God provides, not always in the ways we expect, but always in the ways we need." She turned to Kevin, her eyes bright with tears. "Maybe God didn't send us money, child. He sent us Kevin." The room fell silent, touched by the simple truth of her words. Kevin bowed his head, overwhelmed by the acceptance and love he'd found in this unlikely place. As the celebration continued, the cafe filled with the sounds of joy and community. Someone started playing hymns on the small piano in the corner, and voices joined in, creating an impromptu choir. The kitchen staff served plates of traditional dishes contributed by neighborhood families, tamales next to Italian cookies, Vietnamese spring rolls beside kosher rugelach. The aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods wafted through the air. Victoria moved through the crowd, greeting guests and ensuring everything ran smoothly. She caught glimpses of Kevin doing the same, refilling water glasses, adjusting chairs, laughing with elderly customers. He looked completely at home, as if he'd always belonged here. Late in the afternoon, as the crowd began to thin, Victoria found herself near the back office. Kevin was there, organizing receipts with the same attention he'd once given to million-dollar contracts. "Quite a day," she said softly. He looked up, and their eyes met. Without speaking, they gravitated toward each other until they stood close enough to feel each other's warmth. Their foreheads nearly touched as they shared a quiet laugh, surrounded by the gentle hum of conversation and clinking dishes from the cafe. "Thank you," Kevin whispered. "For what?" "For showing me what real wealth looks like." That night, after the last guest had left and the dishes were washed, Kevin sat in his modest new apartment above the cafe. The space was small but comfortable, with a view of the street below. He opened his journal, a habit he'd started during the renovation, and began to write. "I thought I'd give up my fortune for love. Turns out I had to lose it to find it. The irony isn't lost on me, how everything I thought I wanted slipped away, only to be replaced by everything I truly needed. The numbers in my bank account have fewer zeros now, but my life has never been richer." Through his window, he could see the cafe's sign glowing softly in the darkness. The same darkness that had once seemed so empty now felt full of promise, like a sky full of stars just waiting to be discovered. The morning sun streamed through the cafe's windows, catching dust motes in its golden light. Victoria hummed as she arranged fresh pastries in the display case, while Kevin balanced the previous day's books at a corner table. The cafe had become a neighborhood favorite, drawing crowds from all walks of life who came not just for the food, but for the warmth and community they found there. But their peaceful morning shattered when Kevin's phone buzzed with an urgent message. His face grew pale as he read it. "What's wrong?" Victoria asked, noticing his distress. "Emergency board meeting," he said, his voice tight. "They're calling for an immediate vote." At Langford Industries headquarters, Kevin faced a boardroom full of stern faces. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Mr. Langford," the lead director began, "your recent escapades have become untenable. The company has lost 43% of its market value since your public spectacle began." Another board member jumped in. "This isn't just about the money anymore. Your behavior has made us a laughingstock in the industry. A CEO playing barista? Dating a waitress? The press is having a field day." "That waitress has more integrity than everyone in this room combined." Kevin shot back, his voice steady but fierce. The lead director's face hardened. "We're not here to debate your personal choices. We're here to protect this company." He slid a document across the table. "The board has voted. You're being removed as CEO, effective immediately." Kevin stared at the paper, his world tilting on its axis. "You can't do this. I built this company." "Your father built this company." Another member interrupted. "You've spent the last 6 months trying to tear it down." Within hours, the news exploded across every major financial network. Headlines screamed, "Langford Empire falls, the Virgin CEO bankrupt." Social media lit up with memes and cruel jokes about the billionaire who threw it all away for love. But worse was yet to come. Legal notices arrived informing Kevin that his personal assets were being frozen pending investigation of questionable financial decisions. His access to accounts was cut off, credit cards declined, and even his penthouse was placed under review. The media frenzy spilled over onto the cafe. Paparazzi camped outside, harassing customers and staff. One morning, they arrived to find the windows covered in spray-painted slurs. "Gold digger" and "fortune hunter" aimed at Victoria. Kevin worked tirelessly to clean off the graffiti before Victoria arrived, but she saw it anyway. She stood there, shaking, as tears rolled down her face. "I never wanted any of this," she whispered. That evening, after closing, Victoria found Kevin in the kitchen, mechanically washing dishes. The weight of everything hung heavy between them. "We need to talk," she said softly. Kevin dried his hand slowly, knowing what was coming but dreading it all the same. "I can't do this anymore," Victoria continued, her voice breaking. "The cameras, the gossip, the hate. It's too much. My mother can't even go to church without people whispering about us." "I'll fix this," Kevin promised, reaching for her hand. She stepped back. "That's just it, Kevin. You can't fix everything. And She paused, gathering courage. "I wanted a partner, not a fallen king. I fell in love with the man who washed dishes and burned muffins, not the CEO trying to save everyone." Kevin felt each word like a physical blow, but he understood. His presence was hurting the very people he'd wanted to protect. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he said quietly. "I know," Victoria replied, wiping away tears. "That's what makes it harder." That night, after Victoria left, Kevin sat alone in the darkened cafe. The place that had given him purpose now felt like a monument to his failures. He pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. "You were right. I never knew what giving meant. Now I do. Sometimes giving means letting go. The cafe is yours. All paperwork has been transferred to your name. Take care of our family here. K." He left the note on the counter, weighted down by his cafe keys. Outside, the city hummed with its usual nighttime energy, oblivious to the pain within those walls. Kevin walked away from the cafe, carrying nothing but a small bag of clothes. No driver waited for him, no assistant managed his schedule. For the first time in his adult life, he was truly alone. As he disappeared into the maze of city streets, the media vultures didn't notice his departure. They were too busy crafting tomorrow's headlines about his downfall. But Kevin wasn't thinking about headlines anymore. He was thinking about grace, about loss, and about how sometimes the most valuable lessons come at the highest price. The night swallowed him up, another anonymous figure in a city of millions. Behind him, the cafe's sign glowed softly in the darkness, a beacon of what had been and what might have been. The harsh winter wind whistled through Manhattan's concrete canyons, carrying flurries of snow that danced in the glow of streetlights. Inside Maribel's cafe, Victoria wiped down the counter for the third time, her movements mechanical, her mind elsewhere. The clock on the wall read 8:45 in the evening, another slow day coming to a close. She paused at the register, counting the day's earnings with trembling fingers. The stack of bills seemed thinner with each passing week. Where donations and community support had once flowed freely, now there was only the occasional generous tip from regulars who remembered better days. "You shouldn't be here so late, Miha," called Rosa, the elderly cook, as she hung up her apron. "The snow's getting worse." Victoria managed a weak smile. "Just finishing up the books. Go home safe, Rosa." Once alone, Victoria sank into a booth by the window, the same one where Kevin had sat during his first visit as Kevin Lake. The memory made her chest ache. She pulled out the ledger, its pages filled with red ink. The cafe's expenses were mounting, repairs needed, suppliers demanding payment, and the heating bill growing steeper as temperatures plummeted. The bell above the door chimed, startling her. Father Miguel stomped snow from his boots, his silver hair dusted white. "I thought I might find you here," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "How are you holding up?" Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "The cafe's struggling. People, they don't come as much anymore. Not since—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but Father Miguel understood. The media circus had died down. but its effects lingered like frost on glass. Some customers still whispered about the scandal, treating the cafe like a tourist attraction rather than the community haven it was meant to be. "And your mother?" the priest asked gently. "Better." Victoria nodded, grateful for the change of subject. "The surgery, it worked. She's getting stronger every day." Her voice softened. "She asks about him sometimes." Father Miguel reached across the table, patting her hand. "We all do, child." Victoria's eyes drifted to the kitchen, where memories of Kevin's failed attempts at baking still brought a ghost of a smile to her face. "There are rumors," she said quietly. "People say they've seen him. On the streets. Living rough." Her voice caught. "It can't be true, can it? He must have somewhere to go." The priest's silence was answer enough. Victoria pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting back tears. "I check the shelters," Father Miguel admitted. "But if he's out there, he doesn't want to be found." Outside, the snow fell harder, coating the sidewalks in fresh white. Victoria thought of Kevin out there somewhere, perhaps huddled in a doorway or beneath a bridge. The man who once commanded boardrooms, reduced to searching for warmth in the city's shadows. Every night, after closing, Victoria would stand in the cafe's doorway, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air, and pray. "Lord, if he's out there, keep him warm, keep him safe." Sometimes, she added, barely above a whisper, "and bring him home." The cafe's finances grew more precarious as January dragged on. Victoria cut back on staff hours, took extra shifts herself, and still barely made ends meet. The community tried to help. Church members brought home-cooked meals, local vendors extended credit, but it wasn't enough to stem the tide of mounting bills. One particularly bitter morning, Victoria arrived to find the cafe's pipes had frozen overnight. As she stood in the flooded kitchen, watching a plumber shake his head at the estimate, her strength finally faltered. She retreated to the storage room and wept, surrounded by bags of coffee beans Kevin had ordered months ago. That evening, after mopping up the last of the water, Victoria found an old notebook tucked behind the register. Inside were Kevin's careful calculations and plans for the cafe, margin notes about hiring veterans, ideas for community programs, even little sketches of table arrangements. His handwriting, neat and precise, blurred before her eyes. "I miss you," she whispered to the empty cafe. "I miss your terrible jokes and your burning toast and the way you made everyone feel seen." The winter seemed endless. February brought more snow, more slow days, more nights of Victoria lying awake wondering if she'd made a mistake in letting Kevin go. Her mother noticed her daughter's fading spirit and tried to help in her own way. "Perhaps," her mother suggested one evening, "God is testing both of you, teaching you both what really matters." Victoria thought about this as she worked, remembering how Kevin had changed during his time at the cafe. How his designer suits had given way to flour-dusted aprons, his corporate mask melting into genuine smiles. He had learned to serve rather than command, to listen rather than direct. But the lessons had come at such a cost. His empire, his reputation, his very identity, all stripped away. And for what? A small cafe and a woman who'd pushed him away when he needed her most? The regulars who remained loyal to the cafe shared whatever news they heard about Kevin. A homeless shelter volunteer swore she'd served him soup last week. A street vendor claimed to see him helping other homeless people find warm places to sleep. Each story twisted Victoria's heart a little more. She kept his note, the one he'd left that final night, in her pocket like a talisman. The paper had grown soft from handling, the words beginning to fade. "You were right. I never knew what giving meant. Now I do." At night, after counting the meager earnings and turning out the lights, Victoria would stand at the cafe window, watching snow spiral down through pools of streetlight. The city seemed bigger somehow, colder, as if it had swallowed Kevin whole into its vastness. Lord, she would pray, her forehead pressed against the cold glass. If he's out there, keep him warm, and if it's your will, help him find his way back, not to what he was, but to who he became here, the man who burned muffins and made children laugh and showed us all what it means to start over. The cafe's warmth lingered behind her, a reminder of what they'd built together, not just a business, but a family, a home. Even in its struggles, it remained a testament to what love could build from the ashes of ambition. As February deepened, Victoria continued her routine, opening early, serving coffee, counting pennies, and praying in the darkness. She held on to hope like a candle flame in winter, fragile but refusing to die. Keep him warm, she whispered each night. Keep him safe. Keep him close to your heart, even if he's far from mine. The snow kept falling, covering the city in white, hiding its scars and secrets. Somewhere in that vast whiteness, a former CEO wandered, learning lessons no boardroom could teach. And in a small cafe, a woman who loved him kept the lights on, waiting for spring. The night was particularly brutal, with temperatures dropping well below freezing. Victoria's hands ached as she counted out the day's meager earnings, barely enough to cover tomorrow's supplies. The cafe's old heating system groaned against the bitter cold, and she could see her breath even inside. She pulled her worn coat tighter, gathering the day's trash. The cafe's warmth, modest as it was, had become a sanctuary for many during these harsh winter months. Regular customers lingered longer over their coffee, and she never had the heart to rush them back into the cold. The back alley was dark, lit only by a flickering security light that cast long shadows between the dumpsters. Victoria's boots crunched in the fresh snow as she made her way to dispose of the garbage. The wind cut through her layers like ice, making her eyes water. That's when she heard it. A soft, muffled cough coming from behind the dumpster. Her heart skipped a beat. The city had grown more dangerous lately, with more people desperate for shelter from the bitter cold. She almost turned back, almost called for help, but something made her pause. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Is someone there?" Another cough answered her, followed by a weak, shifting sound. Victoria moved closer, clutching her keys between her fingers as makeshift protection. As she rounded the dumpster, her eyes fell on a huddled figure pressed against the brick wall, covered by what looked like little more than a thin blanket crusted with ice. The security light flickered again, illuminating the scene in harsh bursts. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge her presence. Worry overcame caution, and Victoria knelt beside the person, her hand reaching out to lift the face partially hidden by a matted beard and dirt. Her heart stopped. "Kevin," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. His face was gaunt, his skin pale and cold to the touch. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and moved millions with a signature was now shivering against a dumpster wall. His eyes, when they finally met hers, held the same gentle intelligence she remembered. But now they were clouded with exhaustion and something else, a profound sadness that made her throat tight. "Victoria," he whispered, his breath creating small clouds in the freezing air. I'm sorry, I just wanted to be near the cafe, to know it was still here." His hands trembled as he clutched something to his chest, a book, its covers worn and pages dog-eared. Victoria recognized it immediately. Her Bible, the one she'd given him months ago when he'd first started working at the cafe. The sight of it, clearly well used and carefully preserved despite his circumstances, brought tears to her eyes. "I wanted to see," he continued, his voice rough from disuse. If people could love me without my fortune. He paused, coughing again, the sound rattling in his chest. But I was the one who needed to learn love first. Victoria's tears fell freely now, freezing on her cheeks in the bitter cold. You stubborn, stubborn man! She choked out, already shrugging off her coat to wrap around his shoulders. You really did give it all up. Kevin's attempt at a smile was heartbreaking. The verses you marked, about losing everything to gain what matters, I finally understand them. Victoria didn't waste another moment. With strength she didn't know she possessed, she helped Kevin to his feet. He swayed dangerously, and she could feel how much weight he'd lost as she supported him. Together they made their slow way back to the cafe's service entrance. Inside, Victoria's hands shook as she turned up the heat and lit the old gas stove for extra warmth. She gathered every blanket from the storage closet, blankets they kept for homeless visitors during the day, and wrapped them around Kevin's trembling form. He sat in a chair near the stove, looking somehow both smaller and more real than she'd ever seen him. How long? She asked, busy making hot tea with honey. How long have you been out there? I never really left, Kevin admitted softly. After everything fell apart, I stayed nearby, learned what it means to have nothing, to be invisible. He accepted the tea with shaking hands. The shelters are full of stories, people who lost everything to projects like the ones I used to approve without a second thought. Victoria pulled up a chair beside him, her own tears flowing freely now. You could have come inside, any time. You knew that. No. He shook his head slowly. I needed to understand. Really understand. The Bible you gave me, it talks about being broken to be remade. I think I finally know what that means. She noticed how carefully he held the Bible, its pages marked with sticky notes and underlined passages. This wasn't just for show. He'd been studying it, wrestling with it, letting it reshape him in the darkness of his exile. Your mother? He asked suddenly, concern filling his tired eyes. Is she? She's fine, Victoria assured him quickly. The surgery you arranged, it worked. She asks about you, you know. Prays for you every day. Kevin's shoulders shook, and for a moment Victoria thought he was coughing again. Then she realized he was crying. Silent, exhausted tears running down his face and into his unkempt beard. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. It was rough now, calloused, so different from the manicured hands that had once signed million-dollar contracts. I should have known, she said softly. Should have looked harder. All those rumors about seeing you around the neighborhood. You were right to send me away. Kevin interrupted, his voice stronger now. I had to lose everything to find what matters. My whole life I thought I could buy meaning, buy respect, buy love. He looked around the cafe, at the mismatched chairs and worn tables they'd once picked out together. But real love, it costs everything, not in money, but in who you are. Victoria stood, wiping her eyes. You need a doctor, food, a proper place to sleep. Victoria. He caught her hand, his grip gentle but urgent. I'm not asking for anything. I needed you to know that you were right. About all of it. About what really matters. She looked down at him. This man who had given up billions, who had chosen to become nothing in order to understand everything. The proud CEO was gone, replaced by someone humbled and human and infinitely more precious. What matters, she said firmly, is that you're never sleeping behind that dumpster again. Ever. She squeezed his hand. We'll figure out the rest together. That's what family does. Kevin's eyes widened at the word family, and fresh tears spilled over. Outside, the wind howled and snow continued to fall, but inside the cafe, near the warmth of the old stove, Something long frozen began to thaw. Victoria wrapped her arms around Kevin's shoulders, holding him as he wept, as months of cold and loneliness and learning poured out of him. "Welcome home," she whispered, and felt him shake with silent sobs. "Welcome home." Victoria made up a makeshift bed in the cafe's back office, using the old couch they kept for staff breaks and every spare blanket she could find. Kevin's fever ran high that first night, his body finally surrendering to months of exposure and malnutrition. She stayed with him until dawn, replacing cool cloths on his forehead and praying quietly when he drifted into fitful sleep. The morning light revealed the full extent of his transformation. His designer clothes had been replaced by layers of threadbare thrift store finds. His once perfectly trimmed hair was long and tangled, his face gaunt beneath the unkempt beard. But his eyes, they held a different kind of wealth now, a hard-won wisdom that touched Victoria's heart. "You need to eat," she insisted, bringing him homemade chicken soup in careful portions. "Small sips will build your strength back slowly." Kevin's hands trembled as he held the spoon. "I don't deserve this kindness," he whispered. "Hush," Victoria said firmly, tucking another blanket around his shoulders. "That's not how grace works, remember?" Between spoonfuls of soup, Kevin began to share his story. After leaving the cafe months ago, he'd systematically dismantled his empire, not just accepting his board's decision to remove him, but actively giving away what remained of his personal fortune. "I sold the penthouse," he explained, his voice hoarse. "The cars, the art collection, everything. Set up anonymous trusts for community development in the neighborhoods I'd helped destroy." He paused, coughing. "The lawyers thought I'd lost my mind." Victoria listened, her heart aching as she understood the depth of his transformation. "And your personal accounts?" "Donated," he said simply. "Most to homeless shelters and addiction recovery programs. The rest to small business grants for families facing eviction." He managed a weak smile. "I kept enough for a few months' rent, but then what? Then I saw a veteran sleeping in the park. Former tech worker who lost everything in the .com crash. I gave him my last month's rent money and my room key." Kevin's eyes filled with tears. He had a family waiting for him in Ohio, just needed a bus ticket and a fresh start. Victoria squeezed his hand, her own eyes wet. "So you chose the streets?" "I chose to understand," he corrected gently. "Really understand what it means to have nothing, to be invisible, to rely completely on God's provision." He gestured to the worn Bible on the side table. "Your Bible, it became my map, my comfort. Everything Jesus said about the poor, about true wealth, it finally made sense." That afternoon, Victoria called Father Miguel. The priest arrived quickly, his calm presence filling the small office with peace. He examined Kevin with careful hands and knowing eyes, having seen too many cases of exposure and malnutrition in his shelter work. "You'll need antibiotics for that chest infection," Father Miguel said, writing out a prescription. "And proper meals, rest, time to heal." He looked at Victoria. "The church can help with medical expenses." "No," Kevin said firmly, trying to sit up straighter. "I won't take resources from those who need them more." Father Miguel smiled gently. "Kevin, accepting help when you truly need it, that's part of God's economy too. Sometimes we serve best by letting others serve us." Over the next few days, a quiet routine developed. Victoria opened the cafe each morning, then spent her breaks tending to Kevin. She brought him fresh clothes from the church's donation bins, helped him shower in the cafe's small bathroom, and trimmed his beard with careful hands. Each small act of care seemed to rebuild something in both of them. Kevin insisted on helping despite his weakness. He would shuffle out to sweep the floor or fix wobbly table legs, stopping frequently to catch his breath. The regular customers, many of whom remembered him from before, welcomed him back without questions. They seemed to understand that the man before them now was more authentic than the billionaire who had once tried to save them. "I wanted to be the man you saw that first night," Kevin told Victoria one evening as she changed his bandages. "When you refused my help in the rain, your dignity, your independence, it woke something in me, made me realize how empty my own life was." Victoria's hand stilled. "I was too harsh that night," she admitted. "Too proud." "No." Kevin shook his head. "You were exactly what I needed. Someone who saw through all the money and power to the broken man underneath." He caught her hand. "Someone who made me want to be worthy of real love, not just admiration." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Victoria felt old anger and hurt dissolving into something deeper, a profound respect for the journey this man had chosen, the complete stripping away of everything he'd once valued. Father Miguel visited daily, bringing medicines and offering spiritual counsel. One afternoon, he found them sharing soup and reading the Bible together during the cafe's quiet hours. "You know," the priest said thoughtfully, "there's a difference between punishment and penance. What you did, Kevin, living on the streets, giving everything away. It wasn't just self-punishment. It was a journey toward understanding, toward real transformation." Kevin nodded slowly. I think I needed to lose it all to find out who I really am, who God made me to be." "And who is that?" Victoria asked softly. "Just a man," Kevin answered, his voice thick with emotion. "A man who finally understands that love, real love, isn't about what you can give or take. It's about who you become for each other." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. She remembered their early days, when he'd hidden behind wealth, and she'd hidden behind pride. Now here they were, all pretenses stripped away, sharing simple soup and ancient words of wisdom. "The cafe needs painting," she said suddenly, changing the subject before emotion overwhelmed her. "The back wall is peeling again." Kevin's eyes lit up with familiar determination. "I can help with that, once I'm stronger." "We'll do it together," Victoria corrected him. "That's how we do things now." Father Miguel watched them with knowing eyes, seeing how gratitude had replaced guilt, how genuine care had grown from the ashes of their earlier conflicts. Here, in this humble back room of a struggling cafe, real healing was taking place, not just of body, but of spirit. The days continued, marked by small victories. Kevin's fever broke. His cough eased. Color returned to his face. But the biggest changes were invisible, the way he listened more than he spoke, the genuine joy he took in simple tasks, the peace that seemed to radiate from him despite having lost everything. Victoria found herself looking forward to their quiet moments together, sharing meals, reading scripture, talking about dreams that had nothing to do with money or status. She realized that while she'd once been attracted to his humility, she was now drawn to his authenticity. This was a man who had chosen to rebuild himself from nothing, guided by faith and a desire for genuine connection. The cafe's regular customers began bringing small gifts, home-knitted scarves, books, home-cooked meals. Kevin accepted each offering with profound gratitude, understanding now that these weren't acts of charity but expressions of community. The very thing he'd once tried to buy with grand gestures was being freely given, person to person, heart to heart. Spring bloomed across the city, painting the streets with cherry blossoms and fresh hope. The harsh winter that had tested Kevin and Victoria's resolve melted away, leaving behind a stronger foundation than either could have imagined. Word spread through social media and local news about the former CEO, who now served soup and coffee alongside those he once sought to displace. The fallen CEO who serves soup to the poor became a headline that caught fire, but not in the way the media expected. Instead of mockery, it sparked inspiration. Donations began flowing in, not just money, but equipment, supplies, and most importantly, volunteers. The cafe hummed with new energy as people from all walks of life came to be part of what they saw as a modern miracle. Some days, the line stretched around the block. Kevin remained unchanged by the renewed attention. He still arrived early each morning to sweep the floors and prep the kitchen, wearing the same worn apron and gentle smile. But he found a new calling in the afternoons, teaching basic business skills to struggling youth from the neighborhood. In the cafe's back room, he shared practical wisdom about budgeting, planning, and ethical entrepreneurship. Money isn't the goal, he would tell his students, many of whom came from homes where every dollar mattered. It's a tool to serve others. I had to lose everything to learn that. Victoria watched him work with pride, seeing how naturally he connected with the teenagers who reminded him of his younger self, driven but directionless, hungry for both success and meaning. One spring afternoon, a journalist from the city's leading newspaper arrived. She spent hours observing, taking notes, and interviewing customers. The reporter seemed particularly moved by how Kevin and Victoria worked in perfect sync, anticipating each other's needs without words. When the article came out, the headline read, "The Man Who Gave Up His Fortune for Love." The story painted a picture not of scandal or failure, but of redemption and authentic connection. Victoria couldn't help but laugh at the romantic spin, but her laughter caught in her throat when she saw the accompanying photograph. The photographer had captured a moment behind the counter, Kevin and Victoria standing close, their foreheads nearly touching as they shared a quiet smile. The image radiated intimacy and joy, catching the light in Victoria's eyes and the peace in Kevin's expression. It was the kind of happiness money could never buy. That evening, as the cafe closed and the spring air turned cool, Kevin walked Victoria home as he always did. The sky painted itself in soft pinks and purples, and cherry blossoms drifted, down like snow. They walked in comfortable silence, their shoulders occasionally brushing. "Did you see the article?" Victoria asked, glancing at him sideways. "I did." Kevin nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. "They got one thing right. I did give up my fortune for love, just not in the way they think." "What do you mean?" Kevin stopped walking, turning to face her under the pastel sky. His eyes held a depth of understanding that hadn't been there in his wealthy days. "You once told me love can't be bought," he said softly. "You were right. It's built, one act of kindness at a time." Victoria's heart swelled as she recognized the truth in his words. Their love hadn't sprung from grand gestures or financial rescue. It had grown slowly, nurtured by shared work, shared faith, and countless small moments of choosing each other over pride or fear. The street around them was quiet, the evening air sweet with spring promises. They stood there, two people who had found something far more valuable than fortune. They had found purpose, and in finding it together, they had found love. A year had passed since that transformative spring. The seasons had cycled through summer's warmth, autumn's gold, winter's quiet, and back to spring again. Through it all, Maribel's Cafe stood as a beacon of hope in the neighborhood, its windows glowing with welcome no matter the weather. The cafe had evolved into something far more than a simple restaurant. It had become the beating heart of the community, a place where dignity and kindness were served alongside hot meals and fresh coffee. The walls, once bare, now displayed artwork from local children and photographs of success stories. Former homeless veterans who'd found work there, teenagers who'd graduated from Kevin's business classes, elderly neighbors who'd found family among the regulars. Kevin and Victoria lived simply in the cozy apartment above the cafe. Their home wasn't grand, no marble countertops or designer furniture, but it was filled with warmth and purpose. Each morning, they would descend the narrow staircase together, ready to serve their community with joy. On this particular evening, the cafe hummed with special energy. It was the 1-year anniversary of the reopening, and they had organized a celebration dinner for the neighborhood. The tables were pushed together to form one long community feast, decorated with wild flowers from the window boxes Victoria tended. Paper lanterns strung across the ceiling cast a gentle glow over everything. Father Miguel sat at one end of the table, his weathered face beaming as he blessed the food. Victoria's mother, healthier now and glowing with pride, helped serve plates piled high with home-cooked dishes. Even some of Kevin's former board members had come, transformed by what they'd witnessed over the past year. The cafe's regular customers mingled with local business owners and volunteers. A homeless veteran who'd found work as their morning cook shared stories with a teenager from Kevin's business class. Their laughter mixed with the clinking of glasses and the warm murmur of conversation. Kevin moved through the crowd with natural ease, so different from his old gala days. He wore a simple button-down shirt with rolled-up sleeves, and his smile reached his eyes in a way it never had in his CEO photographs. He stopped to chat with everyone, remembering names, asking about families, celebrating small victories. Victoria watched him from behind the counter where she was cutting pie. She remembered the night she'd found him in the snow, how close she'd come to losing him. Now, seeing him so at peace, so genuinely connected to others, filled her heart with quiet joy. As the evening wore on, guests began to drift home, carrying leftover containers and warm memories. The cafe grew quieter, more intimate. The remaining lanterns cast pools of golden light across empty tables and swept floors. Victoria was wiping down the counter when she felt Kevin's presence behind her. His arms slipped around her waist, and she leaned back against him, both of them taking in the peaceful moment. "Remember that first night?" she asked softly. "When you nearly ran me over in your fancy car?" Kevin chuckled, the sound rumbling against her back. "I remember the way you looked at me. Like I was just another rich man who thought money could fix everything. Well, wasn't that what you thought back then?" "Maybe," he admitted. "But someone taught me different." Victoria turned in his arms, facing him with a playful smile. "That someone must be pretty special." "She is." Kevin's eyes held hers with deep tenderness. "She taught me that real wealth isn't in bank accounts. It's in moments like these." Victoria reached up to touch his cheek, noting the laugh lines that had replaced his old worry creases. "Still think you'd give up your fortune for one night?" she teased softly, echoing words from their past. Kevin smiled, taking her hands in his and pressing his forehead to hers, their gesture of intimate connection. "I already did," he whispered, voice full of quiet joy. "And I got forever instead." Their moment was wrapped in the gentle sounds of the cafe, dishes being washed in the back, the old ceiling fan's comfortable whir, distant city sounds muffled by windows that needed washing again tomorrow. The remaining lanterns swayed slightly in the evening breeze, casting dancing shadows across their faces. Around them, the cafe held its own kind of music, the echo of 1,000 conversations, countless cups of coffee shared between strangers, turned friends, prayers whispered over warm meals, and lives changed through simple acts of kindness. This was their legacy now, not measured in dollars but in moments of grace. The scene settled into perfect stillness, laughter from the kitchen where the last few guests helped clean up, candlelight flickering on well-worn tables, and two souls who had found redemption not through power or privilege, but through surrender to something greater than themselves. In this modest space above a cafe in a once-forgotten corner of the city, they had discovered what Kevin's billions could never buy: the richness of a life lived in service, the warmth of true community, and love built on the foundation of grace. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.